Hi, welcome everybody. This is Ian O'Byrne. I'm the Department Editor of Multiliteracy's Production and Consumption for the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy. Uh, Basically, this series, we wanted to put together videos where we would talk with experts in the field to provide some context to the columns that I've been writing for my tenure as Department Editor. The first issue, the first column, was printed last week. It's titled "Empowering Learners in the Reader-Writer Nature of the Digital Informational Space." And to start off our first video in the first column, I wanted to take some time and speak with a friend of mine, Jennifer. Jennifer, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Okay, and thank you so much. I'm Jennifer Rousel. I'm here in Canada. I'm a Canada Research Chair in Multiliteracies at Brock University.
Thank you very much. One of the questions I wanted to know is, so in the column I talk about providing a space or providing opportunities to have students be readers and writers of online information. And from your perspective, if we were to develop that classroom, what would that look like?
Well, it's something I think about quite a bit, and I'm a big one for moving between paradigms. And by that I mean thinking about the 20th century and the 21st century. So when I do work with iPads, and I've been involved in two larger projects where I actually watch children use iPads, read texts on iPads, write texts on iPads, I'm often trying to figure out what are they doing exactly. So one of the issues I find is that children tend to go across a lot of shorter sorts of texts. So they might look at a website, and they might look at a video game, and they might look at another sort of a text, but they don't do that deep reading. So when I say moving between paradigms, I mean I think it's important to have even quite traditional things like read-alouds and students reading books that they really love, and at the same time thinking about what's the sort of online reading we're doing. So creating a language around different reading events, so more sustained reading with things like novels and graphic stories, but also how can we have sustained reading when we're working on something like a tablet, and how do we want to think about that as educators. I think the other issue is that we need to change the nature of the space, the learning space. So one thing that I've been thinking about and writing about is the notion of a studio space, and that is creating a classroom that has different kinds of centers where students work in teams. And you might ask, well, what's the difference between that and group work, for example? And I think the difference is that the studio time would have the technologies that they need, so the materials that they need in order to do work. They would co-curate, which is a big term now. It's quite popular. I've read some articles in Australia where they talk about a co-curation sort of a model, where students take on different roles and they create different kinds of text. So they might be doing anything from coding something, doing back-end work in creating an interface, or they might be doing a gaming activity, or they might be just using a certain kind of a text and decoding it, or thinking through what's the content here, what's the purpose of this text, doing a bit of a discourse analysis of it. So what studio learning spaces give is they give the autonomy, but they also allow an educator to walk around, work with different students. And the other piece that I'm trying to figure out is how can we pipe in or bring into the classroom some experts. So maybe if they can have 10 minutes with a graphic designer to think about what does it take to create an effective website, talk through how we read websites. And those are kind of radical ideas, but I think that learning classroom spaces we need to change them so that we can leverage what's actually happening. That was all a bit fast, but...
That was excellent.
You get the point.
Well, so one of the challenges, and I tried bringing this up in the column, is that, you talk about the classroom spaces, and you talk about these radical ideas, and specifically the paradigms associated with it. And so, in our work, at least I think that we try to move students from being consumers and reading online information to, I agree with you, to curating that information and making sense of it. But then one step further to, creating it or constructing or even remixing or recreating or rewriting that information. So my question is, what are the thought processes involved, or what do we have to do to help teachers understand and then students understand that we want you to go and do that deep read of online information, but then also you have the opportunity, and sometimes you could and should respond to that, or remix it or rewrite that information. What are those paradigms for teachers and for learners?
Well, again, I mean, I think remix is fundamental to the sorts of things we do all the time. We're constantly remixing. But I go back to what I said with the first question, which is remixing has been around for a long time. I mean, we've done this kind of remixing. I remember interviewing a sound engineer talking about remixing, thinking it's a new concept. But actually, I mean, sound engineers have been remixing forever, right? Taking old songs. So what I think is important when you think about remixing and mashups is that you have to do it across different modes. So in a literacy classroom, it is possible to say to students, again, if you work in that studio model, I'm going to give you a classic song. So Ian, what's a classic song? I don't know, I mean, something silly like Happy Birthday, or something you think about an iconic song and you give it to students and you say, now I want you to go off into groups and I want you to remix it into something else. So you can combine multiple sounds. You can even bring in a Beatles song. You can bring in different genres of music. Mm-hmm. But I want you to come back as a group in an hour and a half with a very different song. So when I say with remix, I think what's important is that you do it with sound, you do it with visuals, you do it with words, importantly. That's one of the big things people say, well, literacy is about words. Well, you remix words all the time, okay? So you want to build on how other modes can remix. That's one point, I think. And I think that the other big point is, again, something I said with my first response, which is it's really important for students to step outside and explicitly talk about what do they do. So if you say, I want you to remix this particular scene in a movie into something else, they need to talk through the process they went through in the group. So we looked at the visual. We thought about how it needed maybe more light, or it needed a certain emotional sound to create emotion in a scene. Or we looked at the way the director framed it, and we decided to bring in this particular dimension. Or we wanted to emulate a particular look, but add in our own pizzazz. So with remix, it's about using different modes, but it's also about explicitly framing what you do and do that meta work, if that makes sense, when they recreate something.
I agree, and we have opportunities to provide multiple modes for our students to express themselves. So if we look at this and say that a lot of these decisions and the thought behind them have existed for a long period of time, how can we change policy, how can we change pedagogy to speak more to adolescents, speak more to young adults?
Well, I mean, I don't know what your experience is, but my experience is I see a lot of great teachers, right? I'll go into classrooms, and more often than not, a lot of teachers are already doing multimodality, and they're already using design and redesign and the principles of multiliteracies. They may not describe it that way. So I think that really curriculum has to change, right? Internationally, curriculum has to change. So I've just done a book with Kathy Burnett and Guy Merchant and Julia Davies, and we looked across at international policy and how many phrases, how many policy initiatives talk about we're 21st century, that's the big line, we're 21st century literacy. But it's really that old wine in new bottles that Langston Noble talked about. So they might incorporate terms like convergence from Henry Jenkins, and they might have remixed, but policy has to radically change, right? We have to teach literacy and build on what we know. So we don't abandon, throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't abandon what we know about reading and writing. So we have writing pedagogy and reading pedagogy, but we really need to meaningfully interweave a lot of these ideas, like the notion of remix, which actually would work well with more of the traditional notion. The two can be married together, I think. I mean, I know I'm an optimist about this stuff, but I think it can. So, I mean, that's not a great answer, but I think it really resides in radical policy shifts that happen, okay? So that we change learning spaces, number one. Number two, we change learning models so that students are co-curating, so that they are doing that kind of studio-based work, that they are able to work across modes, that governments put a lot of funding into getting the technology, because there's social inclusion here as well. You've got a lot of students who don't have the technology at home. So schools have to step up, and governments have to step up in order to get those iPads, and then get experts who can help teachers know what to do with those iPads, because that's the other problem, right? So I know it's fraught, but I think that there has to be a lot of radical shifts, because we do know the information now. We've got a lot of robust research at this point that shows different models that are alternative models to what we have now. So it's a matter of starting to have curriculum take it up, policy take it up.
So the last question I have basically just builds off of that. Many times we talk about literacy and technology, and the only real constant is change. You know, and you just mentioned that good teachers are remixing in their classroom. They are using multimodal content. They are, you know, having students play with online and offline and the spaces in between those different pieces of text. So if you were to speak to the teachers that are aware of this constant change, what would your advice be? How do we prepare students not only now, but prepare students for their future given all this change that's occurring?
Oh, it's a really hard one. One of the things I always go back to when I do different research studies, and I've done them over the years, is I go back to the group that's in front of me. So, I mean, this is nothing new at all, but find out what the interests are, and you're always surprised about what you find out. So, whether you're working with young children or whether you're working with teenagers, who likes gaming? Who likes to draw? Who in the class loves to read literature? So find out what your classroom is, but I think also open up your literacy pedagogy to art, to the arts as well. And I think that's one of the things that's really hit home for me doing this Community Arts Zone project, because bringing the arts into a literacy classroom shifts the landscape, right? Students start to think about, okay, well, let me take a camera and photograph an idea that's in a novel. So it makes them start to think about, how would I visualize a sad scene in Of Mice and Men, or how would I visualize, or how would I take that bit of The Giver in the movie and write it into poetry. So I really believe that one of the secrets to understanding the way we communicate now, and to communicate competently, which is I guess what we want with literacy, is to have students think across what different modes do. Now sometimes that's intimidating for teachers, but actually when you sit down and talk it through, they say, oh, okay, well that's kind of cool. I can do that. I take photographs. I know about whatever. So I would say that that's one way, because right now teachers are hampered by not having the technology they need, or not knowing what to do with the technology they have. So I think right now it's really a do-it-yourself kind of teaching pedagogy that's happening, where teachers say, I know I have to do creative work, I know students are bored, so how do I do that? I don't know whether that works. I don't know whether that's a great response, but that's my feel right now, that we're at this point in teaching where teachers need support because they don't have a curriculum that's necessarily matching the kinds of needs that the students have.
Well said. Thank you very much. I definitely agree with you. So I wanted to thank you for spending 5 good minutes with us to talk about multiliteracy.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah.
I urge all of the viewers out there to go online and read the column, but then more importantly, try out these concepts. Let's find opportunities to empower our students in the online spaces as readers and writers. So thank you once again, Jennifer.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you.